There's new debate even within the Republican Party about President Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. Representative Don Bacon, a Republican from Nebraska, says he will back a discharge petition to force a vote on a Russian sanctions bill. He also criticised President Trump's approach to peace negotiations. Here to break down her key interview with Bacon is the Hill's congressional reporter, Sudiksha Kochi. Sudiksha, what did Bacon tell you about this discharge petition with Congressman Fitzpatrick, and why is he supporting it?
Yeah, so Bacon told me in an interview yesterday that he and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick are considering bringing the discharge petition really as early as next week on Fitzpatrick's Peace Through Strength Against Russia Act of 2025. So this bill was actually introduced in mid-December along with House Foreign Affairs Committee ranking member Gregory Meeks. And essentially what it would do, it would impose sanctions on Russia if they fail to negotiate a peace treaty with Ukraine, violate any such peace treaty with Ukraine, or take any sort of military action against Ukraine. And so the bill would mandate sanctions on Russian officials, sever Russia's ties with the global financial system, and impose sanctions for any sort of war crimes. The reason that Bacon is supporting this is because Bacon is a vocal Ukraine supporter, and he, told me in an interview that it's very important that the U.S. stands with democracy, and Ukraine is a democracy, and so he has touted, the U.S.'s partnership with Ukraine, and he wants to be able to strengthen that partnership and really to isolate Russia from being able to continue their invasion and attacks against Ukraine. And so that's one of the main reasons that Bacon is supporting this petition. Now, the petition does need 218 signatures to succeed, and it has not been filed yet. So that's another thing. We are still waiting to see whether Bacon and Fitzpatrick will bring this discharge petition next week to the House.
Without getting into the weeds of the congressional element of this, obviously what you said about Bacon being very pro-Ukraine and his comments about democracy, those, I think, get at some disagreements he has with how the president has handled the peace negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things, or one of biggest Bacon's biggest complaints with how President Trump has handled negotiations is that he believes that President Trump has appealing a lot to Russia and Russian President Vladimir Putin rather than appealing to Ukraine and their interests. And so one of the biggest things that Bacon told me is that he believes that President Trump needs to have more clarity on the issue. We need to have more moral clarity on the issue. And he believes that President Trump has been wrong on Ukraine. Now, President Trump, Russia and Ukraine are in the midst of talks right now. Those are ongoing at the moment. We're not sure what is going to come out of that. But President Trump did say and did tell reporters that he believes that Ukraine is the reason that these peace negotiations are being stalled. And so he actually has suggested putting the blame on Ukraine for why the peace negotiations are stalled. And that's another reason that Bacon has been very hesitant on the president's stance with Ukraine and Russia. He believes that President Trump has been flip-flopping on the issue. And the way that he described it to me was that he told me that President Trump has been a neutral referee in a boxing match regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so he believes that President Trump has had a lot of moral ambiguity on the issue. And he believes that President Trump needs to have more moral clarity on the issue and really side with Ukraine more rather than, tending to Russian interests.
Beyond the specifics of Congressman Bacon's position, Sudiksha, from your reporting, how deep do you think Republican divisions go on this topic of Ukraine and of Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think there are deep divisions within the Republican Party. There are some moderate Republicans who do believe that President Trump should be more strongly opposed to Russian actions, Russian interests, and should be more siding with Ukraine. Whereas there are some other Republicans who believe that the U.S. should not be sending military aid to Ukraine, should not be, using US taxpayer dollars on Ukraine. And so there is a division in the Republican Party on how Ukraine should be handled. Some Republicans believe that the US has done a lot for Ukraine and they don't believe that there should be further action on Ukraine. Whereas other Republicans believe that the US should stand strongly with Ukraine and should strongly oppose Russia.
Just finally, Sudiksha, this discharge petition that we're talking about, Does that, in your view, have a chance, have a possibility of fundamentally shifting these peace negotiations, or will Trump essentially ignore it as he does with, much of the Republican dissent that he's seen?
Yeah, it all depends on whether President Trump is open to the bill, will sign the bill, or whether he will veto the bill. So when I spoke to Bacon, he told me that he's been in contact with senior GOP leaders in the White House who he said are very inclined to bring the bill to the floor without a discharge petition process. They said that could take about 2 weeks for a full House vote, but Bacon nonetheless is very inclined to go ahead with the discharge petition because he believes President Trump has been flip-floppy on the issue. Now, the problem is if the bill does end up passing the House, any sort of discharge petition would need 218 signatures to succeed. Right now, there are 214 House Democrats, and assuming all House Democrats back the Russian sanctions bill, they would need 4 more Republicans to sign on to the discharge petition. And if that passes the House, it would need to go through the Senate. And the Senate is a little bit of a, I would say, a minefield because they need 60 votes in order to get any bill to advance. And so you would need very heavy Republican support to get the bill through the Senate. And once it lands on the president's desk, I think it's going to be up to the president to decide whether he supports the bill or vetoes the bill, although he's been in discussions with Bacon and Fitzpatrick, and it seems like he is supportive of the bill. So we'll see how that goes. But if he does end up signing the bill into law, it could alter peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine because it would actually put more pressure on Russia to come up with some sort of peace negotiation with Ukraine or risk being sanctioned by the US. And so it could definitely alter the peace negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine. But again, it all depends on whether President Trump is open to signing the bill or whether he will veto the bill and send it back to the House.
One to watch for sure. Great reporting. Sadiq, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.